ahead and call this work session to order on the Midtown Congestion Relief. Let's go ahead and do introductions, starting on this side.
Pete Peterson.
John Weddleton.
Nick Zalaton.
Cameron Perez-Rodillo.
Christopher Constant.
Suzanne LaFrance.
Felix Rivera.
Steve Noble.
Sean Holland.
All right, so we're going to start off before I turn it over to Dow with Ms. Salatel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hold a substantial private interest in this matter, which merits disclosure and non-participation as a member of the body. And so for today, I'm not even going to participate in a work session, even though no action may be taken per the advice of our ethics officer, because participating in a process including deliberation in which decisions or recommendations could be reached could include a work session. And the reason I have a conflict is I live across the street from, I live on Ingram Street, which is one street in from the proposed project.
Thank you. So based on the ruling or the advice from our ethics council as well as our assembly council, I will deem that for this particular situation you do have a conflict.
And I've been advised I can be a community participant, so I
Yes. So different perspective in the audience.
Thank you for doing it.
Okay. Welcome.
Well, I'll kick it off. I'm Sean Holland with the Department of Transportation, and hopefully you guys are at least vaguely familiar with our project, but it's the Midtown Congestion Relief Planning and Environmental Linkages Study, called PPL for short. Up on the wall there we have a roll plot of our current preferred concept. So the projects are focused on the Seward Highway. The limits are Tudor and to the south go to 20th Avenue on the north. And our study area included over to C Street on the west and Lake Otis on the east. So we're nearing the end of our 2-year process for the PEL. The final draft is scheduled to go public today, actually, and we're trying to wrap this up by the end of the year. After we finish that, we'll move into the environmental and design phases of the project. The planning and environmental linkage study is a planning project. So the purpose is to identify solutions that will improve safety, access, and mobility for all users in the Midtown area. The Department of Transportation is contracted with Dow Engineers to take the lead on this PEL. They have their subcontractors are Jacobs Engineering and Kittleson. What this team gives us is a core staff that's we're all Anchorage residents, so we're passionate about the project. We're passionate about the success of the city of Anchorage, and we're invested in the community. The other thing it gives us is access to national expertise. We've involved experts from other parts of the country that have dealt with similar problems to what we're seeing here and help us come up with some solutions. So this corridor has the highest traffic volumes in the state, and with that comes some of the biggest problems in the state, being the longest delays, traffic delays in the state. We have at those intersections in particular some of the highest accident rates in the state. The highway acts as a barrier between the residential zones to the east side and the commercial on the west side. Those big intersections are a deterrent to non-motorized activity. They're big and intimidating for someone who's walking or on a bike. And I guess in my opinion, it's a big sea of pavement, and it's generally an eyesore. With those largest volumes in the state, improvements that we're going to make through this corridor will have the biggest benefit to the most users than any other project that's being planned in the city of Anchorage. So the mission of our PEL was to identify multiple projects in the corridor that would provide a safer, more efficient transportation corridor designed not only to accommodate the highway, but also to bridge east and west for people moving via all modes, whether you're walking, riding a bike, riding a bus, or driving in your car. We're using a 25-year design life, but this project is going to change the face of Midtown for forever, pretty much. It's going to look a lot different when we're done. We've had, the DOT has had 2 recent attempts to get something built here in the corridor in recent history. Highway to Highway project, a great big project. From that, we kind of took a myopic view and looked at our worst problem, which is Seward and 36. For various reasons, both those attempts weren't successful at getting something built. So as part of this effort, we kind of changed our strategy a little bit, and we took a larger focus at a community-based project, or a community-focused project. We've had an unprecedented level of public involvement through this PEL process, and we plan to continue that as we move into the next environmental and design phases. And I guess from a project staff perspective, this project is about much more than building just the highway. It's about using these transportation projects to build community. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve here in a minute to give you a presentation and go into some more detail on what we've been up to. But there's 3 key things that I want you to focus on. And pay attention to it all, but there's 3 key things that seem to slip by people and I think are really important. Number 1, this is a Midtown access project. Less than a third of the traffic that travels on the Seward Highway is going from one end to the other. So over 2/3 of the traffic on the highway are either going to or coming from Midtown. The second thing is 2-phase signals. Steve is going to go over them, but understand how that function is going to improve both safety and efficiency of the traffic movement. That's all types of traffic movement. That's whether you're in a car, on foot, or on a bike. And the third thing is that understand where the active transportation use facilities are. You know, there's we're planning quite a bit more than are currently in accepted plans for bike and peds in the city, and again in response to community input. So in my closing anyway, we need the assembly support to be able to build this project. You know, it's a DOT project, but it affects the city in a large way, so we need your support. And I think, you know, we can keep this somewhat informal through our presentation. If you guys have any questions or concerns, stop and let us know, and we can talk about them. And it's more helpful to us if you're specific, so that we can address those concerns better.
Thank you. So before you start, I actually do have a question. And I want to note for the record that we've been joined by Mr. Dunbar and Mr. Dyson a few minutes ago. Mr. Dyson.
What do you want us to do at the end of these magic hours together here? What do we do to help, or at least get out of your way?
Well, I think, you know, if you can ask questions and get clarifications as we go along, if you could get together afterwards and maybe make a list of your specific concerns.
How much is it? Yeah. So assume you're going to answer all our questions. Is there a positive action you want us to take?
Formal support would be great.
Yeah, they're worth a little more than the paper, but we'll pass a resolution.
It's not going to hurt me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Don't make any assumptions, Mr. Dyson.
And then, is there anything we need to get out of your way to right of ways or any of those kind of things?
Nothing I can think of right now, but if there is,
There will be down the street.
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's get started.
I would just.
Oh, sure, Mr.
add,
Constant.
if the hope is that we just do whatever we can to get out of their way, I'm sure there's some land that they could just blanket take from Eagle River and Chugiak that would swap somehow. You know, that's the conversation we're about to have.
All right, Mr. Constant. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you for darkening. Appreciate that. So I do have a bit of some slides here that we'll go over, and we can keep this informal. And so just let me know if you have any questions. Like Sean said, thanks for your time today. We appreciate the opportunity to go through this. I'm going to briefly talk about some of the history on the project, but I'm going to assume most of you have had some of the information. At risk of repeating everything all over and over again, we're going to try to keep that history to a minimum today. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the main challenges that the project faces and some of the issues that are in the corridor. We'll talk about why we're using the PEL approach and what the benefits of that approach are, and kind of how we got to where we are today. We'll talk about how that process works and the study outcomes and the recommended projects that have come out of the last 2 years worth of work. And then we'll talk about how we're moving forward and be able to have a discussion on any of your questions. So yesterday when I was at the AMAT's policy committee meeting, we were talking about the Vision Zero project, and they were talking about the desire to improve safety in Anchorage, and the regional director made the comment and kind of made a pitch for Midtown Congestion relief, which I appreciated because it reemphasizes the desire that this project is about safety. That is one of the primary drivers. The figure that you have here shows you just the non-motorized fatalities and major injuries in the corridor in the last 10 years. And you can see that there are clusters along the Seward Highway, and there are also clusters in Midtown along A and C Street and along Tudor Road. And as Sean said, this project is about trying to help all modes of traffic, and we are trying to address those high rates of not only non-motorized crashes but also elevated vehicle crashes that are in the corridor. These 4 intersections, 5 intersections at 36, Benson, North Lights, and Fireweed are consistently in the top 10 to 15 in the Anchorage for crash rates and fatal major injury crash rates. The other thing is that this corridor has become a barrier to the community. The quality of life for the people who live along the corridor, who have businesses along the corridor. We've consistently heard from the public that the Seward Highway is a barrier to them. They don't feel safe crossing the road. They don't feel comfortable traveling along the road, and it affects the quality of life. And then there is also the fact that there is some of our worst congestion in Anchorage, in Alaska along this corridor as well. Some of our highest volumes and longest delays. We've got 57,000 cars a day traveling north and south on Seward Highway. And we give all the green time to Seward Highway to make sure we can accommodate that north-south movement. But the price of that benefit is that the side streets, the cross streets, they have longer delays, and we have long crosswalks, and the pedestrian crossings are really long, and we have really long traffic signal cycles. We have 160 to 180 second signal cycles out in this corridor, and so they're big, wide, large intersections that have elevated crash rates, despite the fact that they're high volume. And so Midtown is one of our employment centers, and the development along the highway suffers through the lack of access, through a really deteriorated quality of the experience for motorists living or trying to access the corridor. So why have we tried the PEL approach? So the PEL, just real briefly, the whole goal of the planning and environmental linkage is so that we don't run into the similar situation that we did on Highway to Highway or on the 36th Avenue project, where we got into the preliminary environmental and the design, and we ran into roadblocks that stopped the projects. In this case, we are spending, the state determined that we're going to follow the planning and environmental linkage process, which is a project streamlining effort, not because you're cutting corners, but because you're spending more effort up front to try to flesh out the issues and come up with a plan to be more collaborative with the community, to do a greater level of public and agency stakeholder, to do all this dialogue before you start the environmental process. All of the conversation that we've had on this project is normally not initiated until you start an environmental document. And so that's been the beauty of what we've done so far, is it's been a great thing to participate and to get the community engaged in this dialogue, so that when we come up with a plan that we're moving forward with, we have a good idea of what the hurdles are that we're going to need to cross and get over, and that the project has a much greater chance of moving ahead smoothly. That's the goal. The goal is to reduce the duplication, to reduce rework, to save costs, to be more efficient with the scarce resources and public funds that we have available, to make sure that it's a very open and transparent process. We've made all of the project documentation is available from all of our public outreach. It's all on the website. Everything that we have has been made available for people to review. And really, we've had this unprecedented level of stakeholder involvement early in the process to make sure that we have a project that after we get started on, that we start that environmental process, that we're going to be able to get to the finish line. So, PELs are becoming really synonymous with collaboration, comprehensive evaluation. We're going to talk a little bit about the steps, but multimodal, it's really an extensive public and stakeholder effort that takes and tries to do some of the technical analysis that's usually done in the environmental process and do it during the planning phase, so that we have a solution for moving forward. And those steps of the PEL process in a simplified fashion are shown here on this graphic, and the public involvement is on the green column on the right, and that's essentially because it is one big continuous public outreach effort. And the first step is to get out there and get the existing conditions done. Then we identify and we start this public dialogue at the beginning. We actually go out there kind of with a blank slate. There has been the H2H and 36th Avenue projects, but those projects weren't like a starting point for this. They informed this project, but we didn't start from them. We went out to the public and said, here's the issues. We collected traffic data, we showed them the environmental information, showed them the right-of-way, showed them the land use, showed them all that basic data, and said, tell us what you see are the issues. Tell us what your concerns are. Tell us what you think the potential solutions are. And then we use that to then come up with vision and goals for the corridor. And then that vision and goals then helps feed into a concept development, concept evaluation, and then we get to where we have a preferred concept. And this is where we are in the process of this PEL right now. After a 2-year effort, this is where we're at right now. We're at this preferred concept, kind of a draft preferred concept level, which is what's shown up on the wall. And then that preferred concept is made up of individual projects that work together to achieve that overall vision and concept for the Midtown area. So, one more on the history, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we've heard so far. The public process has been, we've tried to really make it unprecedented. Maybe there's been something out there, but in my 25 years working in Anchorage on transportation work, it's been the most engaging process that I've been a part of or witnessed. And we've had open houses. We have identified advisory groups made up of representatives from the adjacent community councils, from the business owners along the corridor, from stakeholders and agencies. We've had 5 meetings with each of those 3 advisory groups, so that's a total of 15 meetings, plus additional periodic meetings along the way. We've had 2 open houses, and we have our 3rd one scheduled for November 12th. As we're getting ready to put out the draft of the PEL study today. We've regularly attended the community council meetings so that it's not just fly in, tell the public what we want them to hear and fly away. We've been there on a monthly basis to hear their issues and hear their concerns so that we feel like we're part of the community and can hear the nuance that comes from being in attendance at those meetings on a monthly basis that you can't pick up from showing up once or twice a year. In addition to that, we've had the countless one-on-one meetings with just about every agency and interested party that you can think of. That public process over the course of the first year led to what we're calling our vision for the corridor. That vision for the corridor is that Seward Highway become a more safe and more mobile corridor that reduces access, but at the same time And equally, if not more important, is that Midtown have better, improved access, and that it become a more truly walkable, bikeable, accessible, multimodal corridor. So just a few quick photos of the corridor. I'm sure we've all been there, but sometimes you forget just how deteriorated some of the facilities have become. These are some of the sidewalks, some of the walkways, utilities blocking the corridors, missing segments of pedestrian facilities. It's really worn and deteriorated, and is in need of improvements aside from operational and safety issues. There are the crosswalks are so wide in many cases that there's need for median refuge islands because you can't get all the way across in one signal cycle, even though it's a 160-second signal cycle. And you got long queues that build up because of these long cycle lengths. So it's really hard to boil down what we've heard from the public into one slide, but this is probably this is your David Letterman top 10. So what we've heard from the public, number one is they do not want an elevated freeway through Midtown. And if we're going to have any amount of support from the public, we're going to have a depressed freeway, at least depressed under Benson, Northern Lights, and Fireweed. 36th Avenue, we're still looking at over and under scenarios for 36th Avenue, but at least for the city center portion of the corridor, which is Benson, Northern Lights, Fireweed, that's got to be a depressed freeway section. We've got to improve the pedestrian and bicycle facilities. We've got to make sure that it becomes a much more quality experience, comfortable for pedestrians to both cross, bike, and walk along the highway. We want the Chester Creek undercrossing rebuilt. They want to be able to go from Chester Creek to Campbell Creek on the trail system. We want to be able to have shorter crosswalks, be able to get across the street, and feel like you can send your kids across the street without taking their life in their hands. And that it needs to, all those things need to work together to support the land use and the city center concept that is identified in the 2040 land use plan for Midtown. From a right-of-way perspective, a strong advocacy that we minimize right-of-way impacts, that we consider the impacts of widening to either side and not just focus on one side, that we are trying to do what's best for the community, not what's cheapest for the project. There's an overriding sense that if we're going to do this, let's do it right. Let's not forget the aspirational element of really truly improving the community and improving Midtown, and spend and make sure that we have a plan that is an asset to the community and not an impact to the community. As we'll talk about the projects that make up the concepts here, there's also concern about, I think there's more general consensus for the overall build out of the concept, and more concern about those individual projects, and concern that if those individual projects end and we don't get the full benefit of the overall project, concern that we want if we're going to move forward, they want the full build out, not just the benefits that come from those individual projects that are kind of along the way, quote unquote interim. And then there's genuine concern about the couplet, which we'll talk about, and the space, and what are we going to do with that green space that it creates, and how do we make sure that we engage the public and we ensure that their ideas and their that we are spending the resources to truly create that city center concept in Midtown. So real quick, in a graphic format, here's the process we went through to get to our preferred concept. We started out at the beginning 2 years ago with a blank slate. Through our continuous public and agency process, came up with our preliminary concepts. We had A through H, or J, and various iterations of those. We went through a phase 1 screening about a year ago, narrowed that down to about 4 or 5 concepts, and then we've spent the last 9 months or so evaluating those 4 or 5, and then we went through a second phase 2 screening, and we've now gotten down to where we have a preferred concept. Before I dive into the 5 projects that make up the preferred concept, I want to talk a little bit about the community placemaking idea that really came out of after the first few projects were identified, and we had this kind of green space and open space identified, and even the full build out when we have the cap over the freeway, which I'll show you. What does that space look like, and how do we maintain some consistency between the various projects so that we can maintain the vision for the overall corridor, even though these projects are going to be done individually over the course of time. So what came out of that was the desire to continue the discussion with the public and what we're calling community placemaking. We're calling, which is really a strong desire to implement this city center concept that's in the land use plan. And as a direct outcome of that feedback, we're going to aggregate the 3 community advisory groups, the citizen, the business, and the agency. And we're going to continue to meet with them on a quarterly basis. We're going to bring in subject matter experts. We're going to truly look outside the box as to how we're going to make sure that these projects continue to include the public. We're going to look at the way the projects look and feel, what the land uses are, what is the artistic elements that can be included into them, and what kind of multimodal elements from a walking, biking, transit, those kind of elements can be integrated into the projects. And then the outcome of that additional community dialogue will feed into the 5 projects that I'm going to talk to you about over the course of the next year and a half. So, in summation form here, the 5 projects that have come out of the plan, that make up the concept, the preferred concept, are listed here, and we'll talk about them individually. The first one being the Tudor Road interchange reconstruction. This is a project that's been on the books for a long time. It was actually part of the Seward Highway Tudor to Diamond project. There's actually already an environmental assessment completed that includes this interchange. But there are some modifications to the ramps and the layout of this interchange that are to make it consistent with what's happening north of Tudor Road. And primarily the ramp configuration in this area will need to be consistent with what happens further to the north. And to avoid impacts to the neighborhood and to get that hourglass neck down as soon as possible, we are showing a slight shift to the south of the bridge. Which, for reasons which will become more apparent when you see the next project. But if the specific layout, geometry of the individual interchange will be identified as part of the actual Tudor Road interchange project. During the planning study, we're going to identify those issues, but the actual project that will move ahead will flesh those out in greater detail. If indeed this shift in the alignment does occur, there is some potential right-of-way impacts down here on the Parker Drilling property on the south side, or on the east side of the interchange. The next project on the list is Seward Highway 36th Avenue intersection improvements. So this is an at-grade intersection improvement project. There's no bridges associated with this. This is an intersection project that would resolve the congestion and the closely spaced intersection issues and the safety issues and the pedestrian crossing issues at the existing 36th Avenue intersection. Under this configuration, the 2 directions of Seward Highway would be separated out so they could function, so that those 2 signals could operate independently. But the left turning movements would be pulled from the main intersections and pulled out separately into what we're calling median U-turns. These are also more common in the Midwest in the United States. They're called Michigan U-turns if you've been in the Midwest. Under this configuration, if you're headed northbound on the Seward Highway, you would go through the signal, you would get into a left turn lane, and then you would come over here, and through a signalized movement, you'd be able to get onto the old Seward Highway, or to get back on the Seward Highway headed southbound.
Can I see?
Yes.
Sorry, just before you got too far, you mentioned the closely spaced intersection problem. What is that?
So the closely spaced intersection problem we have right now is that Old Seward Highway and the 36th Avenue intersection are so close, and the cycle lengths are so long, and the congestion is so bad that they interfere with each other and cause safety issues and operational issues. So that's what we're trying to solve here. And even though we actually add an additional signal here, the operational evaluation of these, the operational performance of these three signals functions much better than what's out there today.
I have a couple more questions for you, Mr. Constant.
So then, this is the first I'm kind of really grasping this. The projects as envisioned now are not going to result in unsignalized transportation through the core, because this is clearly stoplights on the highway, right?
That's correct.
And so we've seceded that idea. We're no longer working towards a nonstop seamless highway system through the town.
Well, once we get to the end of the projects, this is project number 2. That ultimately, there is a freeway that would be constructed down through the middle of this, eventually. See? So that is still part of the plan. But these projects, the goal here is to develop a plan that has all these individual projects that work together to achieve our overall concept. And I think once you see all 5 of the projects listed out, you'll see how they work together.
I got one more for you, Mr. Dunn.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask this now because I want you to hopefully include this detail on all the other slides as well.
Okay.
Which is, for example, now I'm not a traffic engineer, so I don't know if this is true or not, but perhaps this design will increase traffic on 34th Avenue. I don't know if it will or not. But a few days ago, DOT came here and said, we are doing this project. We know it's going to dump 10,000 cars onto one of your local roads, 14,000 cars on one of your local roads. Ergo, you are going to have to, if you want to have a normal neighborhood, you are going to have to spend $25 million on one of your bonds to improve this road. And there's nothing you can do about it because this project is a juggernaut. You can go pound sand. So my question for you is, on each of these slides, I want you to tell me what the impact on the local roads right next to them will be, and if you guys have budgeted for that. Because for me, if there is an impact to a local road just off of here that is directly impacted, a direct result of what you're doing, then that road improvement should be part of your budget, because we only have so much bonding capacity. And we can't have the vast majority of our bonding capacity consumed by what is essentially a state project. So I guess my first question is, does this impact any traffic flows on local roads? And have you budgeted for those kind of improvements?
So good question, and I will tell you that based on our analysis, there is not a significant traffic increase on 34th Avenue as a result of this. The majority of the traffic still stays on 36 because of this. One of the things that is kind of subtle here is that this section of Old Seward Highway actually becomes one way. You come across and it's only one way this direction. Actually, if you want to get over here to the Moose's instead of being able to come this way, what we're proposing is that we would acquire a new right-of-way over here. So you'd actually turn left, come up here, and then turn right, and be able to access this commercial area. This would solve a lot of those internal circulation issues that are right there in front of the Moose's Tooth Pizza place, and as well as over here. These would have driveway access to these roads. So there would be a driveway to 33rd here and a driveway to some of these other roads. But yes, that's something that we're certainly paying attention to. We're not running any scenarios that are going to dump a bunch of traffic onto a local street and then not solving that. And if I think of any, or if I see of any that have that concern, we would certainly let you know. But I don't know of any of that situation on this project.
Thank you. We would never tell you to pound sand, so.
Well,
at least that's.
Felix, did you have someone else?
What's the orange line?
So the orange line, I was just getting ready to say.
Steve, can I follow up on that a moment?
You betcha.
On Forrest's comment. So when you show, what's that street at the very top that's colored black?
This one?
Yeah.
That would be a new street. I forget the name of this.
Denali.
So
Oh, that's
it's
No,
not
it's
Denali, it's probably Eagle.
Okay.
It's probably
But
Eagle.
what you're showing there, so that's part of your project.
Yeah.
You would do that.
Yes.
But you don't have projections for 34th Avenue then? What would change?
traffic volumes, I do have them, I just don't have them off the top of my head. We don't show them significantly changing as a result of this.
What would
So,
significant be, more than 500?
I would say less than 10% change in the volumes on that street. They're already pretty low.
All right, thanks.
Fred, did you have something?
I just what the orange line is.
The orange line is, good question. The orange line is our pedestrian facilities everywhere. It's not property lines. That's where we're showing multi-use pathways on both sides of the road, on all of our crossings, and along and across the Seward Highway.
Bike trail.
So there's an existing bike trail here. That's why I'm not showing it. This would be a new piece. This would be a new one. This would be a new one, and then we reconstruct along 36 as well.
Thanks.
Yep. So, just one more circulation issue here. If you're on 36 and you want to go south on the Seward Highway, you would come up here, you would turn right, you would turn left, and then you would go this direction. Does that make sense? So the whole configuration here is to make sure that these two signals can then be changed to two-phase signals, like Sean said. These signal cycle lengths will then change from 160 to 180 seconds down to 60 to 80 seconds. So in collaboration with what you'll see as project number 2, these two signals will be able to operate independently. They'll be much faster. They'll function more. They're essentially just green one direction and green the other direction, and no dedicated phases for turning movements. That's what a two-phase signal means. Okay. So let's talk about moving northward here. Seward Highway, Benson, Northern Lights, Fireweed intersection improvements. A very similar type project would be programmed for Benson, Northern Lights, and Fireweed. Under this configuration, we would widen out the existing road, change all the signals to be two-phase signals, and in cooperation with the 36th Avenue Improvements Project, we would then be able to operate the two directions of the Seward Highway, much like a couplet, much like we do with 5th and 6th Avenue downtown, with shorter cycle lengths, much shorter pedestrian walkways. Overall, the pedestrian walkways will shorten by 25 to 35% shorter than the existing crosswalks. We'd be able to progress traffic through at a 35 mile per hour pace instead of 45 and make them more of a community, more of a commercial access type streets. And we would have pedestrian walkways on both sides of the roads for all of these crossings. The side benefit of this configuration is that we would be tackling the right-of-way and utility issues up front as part of this overall concept. When you see the future freeway projects that are proposed, we would be tackling. We wouldn't leave people in. This would enable us not to leave the public or the businesses or the residences in limbo for a long time, because we would tackle the right-of-way and the utility issues up front and be able to get those issues resolved. So that as you'll see on these other projects, we can circle back to this when we then get ready to build the freeway, which is the Seward Highway 36th Avenue interchange and the Seward Highway Benson Boulevard 20th Avenue access improvements, that those projects that then come through and build the freeway, that work would largely be done in the middle, while that other new infrastructure would be able to maintain access to the businesses, maintain access to the residences, maintain multimodal access, and so this is project number 3 here, number 4 here, which is the interchange at 36th Avenue. This would be Seward Highway would either go over or under 36th Avenue. There would be full access ramps to 36th Avenue at this location through the frontage roads. We'd have in order to provide that full access ramps, you do have to do braided ramps back here at Tudor Road. This is why we've had to shift the interchange a little bit to the south. So braided ramps mean that the off ramps for 36 go under the on ramps from Tudor Road, and vice versa here for the southbound direction. The red lines indicate where all the pedestrian facilities would be. We have a connection here to 33rd Avenue, which is the municipality is proposing to improve 32nd, 33rd pedestrian facilities, so we were planning on them coming in and connecting in with our new facility here. But everything that you see here on the map would be part of the project. We wouldn't, it would be included, the circulation changes here would all be included as part of the project. Moving to the north, a similar configuration with the freeway then being able to be built down the middle. This grayed out area here indicates a portion of the freeway that we were envisioning would be capped. I've got some other graphics that illustrate what that would look like. We are currently showing, that the alignment will shift to the east. We've looked extensively at both the west and the east and going down the middle. There is a significant amount of undeveloped property, or buffer property, I would say, that's undeveloped adjacent to the Seward Highway, kind of south of Benson, between 36th and Benson, and then again, there's a 100-foot swath between the residential properties and the highway. In order to take advantage of that, under either configuration, we're likely to need to acquire the 2 gas stations and the Wendy's. And then, in addition to that, to provide the space for the concept as it's currently envisioned, we would need a little bit of space off the back of these residential properties here. We've had a conversation with, I believe, all of those property owners to make them aware of this, of the current concept. That and we actually had a little neighborhood meeting with them a couple nights ago. We originally thought that we would need to acquire all of those properties, but we've recently been able to backtrack from that a bit, and we've come up with some plans where we would be able to save probably 10 of the 18 homes that are there, and kind of take 2 of the lots and replot them as 1 lot, if you can kind of see what I'm saying. And so preserving the residential properties here to the extent that we can, building buffers from a security and a noise perspective. Right now there is no noise protection for this neighborhood at all, or even security. There's no, you can directly see the highway from these homes' backyard. And we've been out and talked to them, and we've had some good discussions with them that have helped enlighten our project a lot.
Before you go on, I do have a question from Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would you mind saying a bit more about what cap means and what depressed means?
Yeah, very good. So I actually have some graphics here. Let me go a couple slides and come back to that question, okay?
Thanks.
Because I have some graphics here. So our next steps after we are putting out the draft PTL study for posting today. And then we're going to enable the public a couple weeks to review it before we have our open house on the 12th. And then we're going to have a 30-day comment period wrap up early December, and with the goal of having the final PEL done by the end of the year. And then this continuation of our working groups, we're going to have our first working group meeting in early 2020. And although there is no funding for any of the construction at this point, the projects, we're still in the planning phase. None of these projects have been added to the STIP yet. So construction dollars we're still unsure exact timing. That's why the years and the number of years I had till these projects happen is still speculative that are shown on there, but we do have funding to initiate the environmental and preliminary design for some of the higher priority projects that would come out of this. Predominantly, it would be that 36th Avenue. It would be the projects. Whoops, I'm going the wrong way here. I'm stealing my thunder here. It would be projects 2 and 3 would be the ones that we would initiate the NEPA process for, and Tudor Road would be probably a comparable timeline. So when it's all done, so here's a graphic of kind of what it would look like, and I'll caution you that this graphic was done before we had come up with a plan to be able to save, to be able to preserve 10 of the homes that are along this stretch here. So this would not be green space anymore. It would be residential property behind the trail here. But this is the capped area that I'm talking about. So the Seward Highway would go over 36th in this concept, and then it would dive down and go under Benson, under Northern Lights, under Fireweed. These streets would all cross at grade, and so then the Seward Highway would be much narrower than it is, and the higher speed, faster moving traffic would be down in a trench. And I'll show you that here in a second. So if you're one of these homes in the Fireweed neighborhood here, you actually, in the finished configuration, you only have one lane adjacent to them on this side, and then 2 or 3 lanes on this side. And so compare that to the 8 or 9 lanes that are visible to them today. Most of that will be down in the trench. When I say trenched, I'll come back to that. The other thing that will be a significant element of this is the pedestrian facilities. Everywhere that's a dash or a solid line would be a new pathway, new walkway. There would be grade separated crossings for the freeway. There would be a brand new crossing of the Chester Creek Trail and a reconstruction of the culverts there. And then you would be able to get from the Chester Creek to Campbell Creek Greenbelt by traveling along the Seward Highway. And we would tie into the 33rd pedestrian improvements from the municipality.
Before you go on, Mr. Dunbar?
I think my question's better for the end. Thank you.
Okay.
So the Chester Creek crossing, this is what it looks like from the bridge. As you're starting to approach the crossing, you can see it's a really narrow, dark tunnel, and it's one of the worst crossings that remain on the Chester Creek. And both from a pedestrian perspective, if you're a pedestrian coming up here in a dusk situation, it's a bit of a foreboding crossing. And I think the fish feel the same way as they're approaching this culvert. This culvert does not meet fish passage requirements, and so we're proposing that would be rebuilt with some sort of combined bridge structure that would enable the creek to be restored underneath with a walkway that would be off to the side, something along those lines. When we talk about frontage roads, essentially the highway that would exist at surface level on both sides of the freeway, we're calling it a frontage road, but it's really the community access. It's the highway that will access the local streets. In general, it will be 2 to 3 lanes wide on each side, with the freeway down in the trench off to the left. And then there would be a buffer, and then there would be a walkway, and then there'll be the commercial properties or the residential properties. If it's a residential area, it would likely have a sound wall or noise mitigation between the walkway and the community. So that's, and then we are envisioning that in the finished condition that this is more of a 35 mile per hour type facility with driveways off of it to access the commercial properties. The trench configuration of the freeway would be established at about 96 feet from face of wall to face of wall. In order to get adequate clearance to go under Benson, Northern Lights, and Fireweed, we would have to lower the freeway about 21.5 feet below the current elevation. The primary challenge, and then the pedestrians and cars would be able to cross over the top. We would be able to preserve enough space for temporary snow storage along this down along the highway, but it would increase maintenance responsibilities for DOT. The biggest challenge we have from building this perspective and maintaining this perspective is that the water table's down about 10 feet, and our surface of our road is down about 21.5 feet. So those buoyancy forces on the bottom of the road would essentially cause the road to float if we didn't do something to draw down the water table. We've started to look at some test borings out in the area. We've got relatively slow moving water in the groundwater out there because of the peat. And so what we're currently envisioning is a couple of concepts. One concept would actually draw down, artificially draw down the water table in the immediate vicinity of the road so that we could take that pressure off of the highway. Either that, or we would have to design this such that it was watertight and put a big block of concrete underneath the road to resist the buoyancy forces of the water table. This is my last slide. So I'm not sure time-wise, how we're sitting here, but maybe some of this will help answer some of your questions. When would construction start? It's still speculation at this point, but we are envisioning that the environmental and preliminary design efforts for those projects 2 and 3, maybe 1, 2, and 3 would start in the next 2 to 3 years. And that if assuming construction funding is available, the design and right-of-way acquisition would then be kind of ongoing in 2 to 3 years after that, with construction pending in the future. Each of those projects that would start would have to go through its environmental process, and each of those environmental process would have its own public and agency outreach effort associated with those individual projects. So we're really just at the beginning of that effort. We are envisioning that there would be multiple environmental processes that would accompany each of the individual projects. One of the questions that we frequently get is Anchorage's population has recently declined. Where's the traffic coming from? What's the growth forecast? Just to answer that question at a brief summation level, essentially we are trying to use the same data that the rest of the municipality is using for the land use plan and for the Anchorage Metropolitan Transportation Plan. That Metropolitan Transportation Plan shows that a traffic growth in Midtown Anchorage of about 20 to 30% over the next 25 years. Yes, we're going to have some down and some up periods, but in aggregate, that traffic growth is showing about 20 to 25% in Midtown, and that the rest of the growth along the Seward Highway is growth from what is shown in the Metropolitan Transportation Plan as the Glen Seward connection, which that traffic that would come over on that corridor is more of a step function as when after the Fairview PEL, which is actually planned to come out in the coming months. As soon as we're wrapping up, as we're wrapping up this one by the end of the year, DOT does have plans to start a very, very similar study for Fairview from where our project ends at 20th Avenue and kick off around up to the Glen Highway and around the corner. That PEL would initiate this winter, and they would come up with the same type of process that would come up with a series of projects that would develop a vision and develop projects for Fairview that would also be added to the transportation improvement program to create more of a continuous corridor here. So with that, I will open it up for discussion and questions.
I do, yeah. If we can get the lights, please. So unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time for back and forth. But Mr. Dunbar.
Yeah, okay, so quick question. Actually, I apologize, I came in a little late. What's the total cost of this whole thing?
Of all of the projects?
Yeah.
We're right at $450 million for everything.
Okay.
For all of the
$450 million. So, all right, we'll talk about that in much more depth in the future about what we could do with $450 million. Can we go back to slide 20, please? Thank you. So this is after phase 3. If we were to get to this point and stop and go no further, would Anchorage be better off or not?
My answer to that is absolutely. If you look at the crash safety data that's on the Seward Highway from a motorized and non-motorized perspective, we can solve both of those problems with this issue, and we can solve the congestion issues. That being said, this does not buy us very much time in the future from a congestion perspective. We're still going to have some congestion issues with this, and ultimately, we're still going to have that through traffic trying to get through here quickly that needs to go north. And so, these projects work together individually. This goes back to that concern we have heard earlier, which is concern about what does this green space look like, both in the interim as well as in the future circumstance, and that's what this group is going to be focusing on. This advisory group is going to be focusing on how does this look if this is in place for 2 years, but what if it's in place for 5 or 6 or 7 years?
Can you go to slide 22 just real quickly? My last question. again, I think you could probably solve your congestion issue with a $450 million investment in the bus system. But anyway, so my nightmare is that we get to this and then we stop, and we never take the next step where it actually does depress the highway. We don't bury it. We say, that's too expensive. It's more pedestrian focused. So we stop right here. Now we have a wider highway running through a freeway. So my question for you is, can it be structured in such a way where we don't go forward with this until we have the funding and everything done ready for phase 5? So 4 and 5 are basically the same step.
So, Sean, you may want to jump in there. I mean, I would say that I don't know that anything's off the table at this point. We're still in the very early planning stages. But, I mean, we are trying to develop projects that are fundable and work within our plan. And if it, so we are trying to identify projects that have a distinct plan. I will say that 4 or 5 years from now, when this project gets done, we're going to have a lot better idea as to whether or not that other project's working its way to the front. Right now, there's no construction dollars for any of these. But if we get to this point, we're building this, and the next project's shown 2 years into the future, into this dip, we're going to have a lot more comfort level moving ahead with a project like this than in our current situation where none of them are showing up in the dip. So I do think that as we get into the environmental process and we add these projects to this dip, we can see how they prioritize and how they rank into our transportation improvement program.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Yeah, each one of these, my goal is for ultimate build-up, but each one of these projects has incremental benefit to that area. If you compare just those first 3 projects to existing, the improvement is fast. And at just this one, the improvement increases incrementally. I'd love to see a complete build-up, but even if we get to just this stage and stop, it's still a big improvement. It's quantified.
So the clerk advises me that we actually do have a little bit of buffer between this meeting and our next one, which starts at 2:30 on the 7th floor. So in order to answer some more questions, we'll go to 2:15. So I got myself in the queue. So I want to thank you for this presentation and for all the effort that you've put in. I don't know how many countless meetings we've been in together where you've gone through all of these details again and again and again. And I know we have some other folks in the room who have been at different community councils too and gone through these details again and again and again.
I think you could give the presentation.
I'll leave that in your capable hands. But I do want to just raise at least 3 ongoing concerns from Midtown residents. And I'll start with what Mr. Dunbar began with. I would change his to say it's not really his concern that this is where it ends. It's Midtown's concern that this is where it ends, and that we go no further, and then Midtown is stuck with something that we're not sure is going to work. So the funding piece, I think, is really critical, and the more that we can be assured of the funding in advance before we even start any of this, I think the more you're going to allay the concerns of Midtown. Second is the need, and I know there has been some discussions on why this is needed, but I would say to a point Midtown isn't entirely convinced that exactly this is what's needed. And then third is the right-of-way, and specifically when we're talking about the residents at Ingra, the sooner that we can let them know when exactly the right-of-way, when their homes will be bought, and frankly, a lot of the folks on Ingra, they're seniors, right? So this is where they were hoping to live out their lives, and now that's not the reality anymore. And so the sooner that we can help them find out what their new reality is, I think the better. And that goes back into the funding piece. So I think it's important to lay those 3 big concerns that Midtown currently has on the table, and hope that that you'll continue working with Midtown to figure those out. So I'll keep going down. Mr. Constable.
Thank you. Could we head to slide 3? All right. So talk about why we're doing this project. And it's very interesting when you look at this cluster, which is the main focal area. You have, the numbers are roughly 5 fatalities in that project area. When you go north, and that's the whole project area, 25 blocks, 4 blocks up there, you have 4 fatalities listed in the same time frame. And here, similarly, tiny little geographic areas relative to where these massive investments are proposed. So the question of why we're talking about it as a safety project definitely raises some questions, right? It's like a relative safety project, a safety project for people who live and work in that 70% get off in this corridor, but not those who live outside. And so I think the question of where we're making our safety investments is an open question at this time, just based on the data provided here. And then, and I'm not saying I don't support this. In fact, the messages that I'm getting from my neighbors are, we've been waiting 30 years, and we've been told now we're going to be the next project looked at, and we see there's an 8-year time span for beginning construction on several of these projects. So maybe in 15 years, we'll finally get to the place that's been asking for this work for 30 years, when this neighborhood who doesn't even want this work, or at least hasn't been convinced that this is the work that they want, is at the point of being bought out, right, and being given papers, you're going to have to leave. And it was so interesting, the phrase that might be in limbo for a long time, 5 to 8 years. I've got properties that DOT already purchased more than a decade ago in the corridor on the north end of this, and those people are still in limbo, but they're not factored into the priority, other than it will come eventually. Now, my neighbors fear that the state will get 100% of what they want, that the municipality will get about 25% of what they want, and that the community members will get nothing. And what that translates into is the state will get their right-of-way, the state will get their acquisition, and the state will get their pathway for cars. The city will get some improvements relative to the access ways to those state right-of-ways, but the actual commitments to the community are always in that soft and squishy part of the proposal that gets left behind when the costs finally get laid on the table. So now would you go to your slide 11? So if all of these things aren't explicitly stated in some kind of a crystallized format in any recommendation of support from this body, I don't think this body would be wise to move forward, because this does summarize what people have said they want. But unless that's encoded and deeply engraved in all the stones that go into all this project, it'll never happen. And so the biggest concern for the constituencies that I continue to hear from regularly, that you do as well, is get this in stone somehow, because if it's not, then all of this is just blue sky. It's another false promise that's going to lead to the poorest neighborhood in the city having 40 more years of poverty laid on it for a failure of transportation policy. So I'm ambivalent. I could go either way, but without some clarity on this exact kind of commitment, I don't know how we can support this project because of past precedent.
Understood. So a couple of things there. I would say that just because the fair PDL is coming secondarily to this PDL doesn't necessarily mean that the projects that result from that study will follow the projects that come out of this study. The projects that come out of this plan are going to be added to the statewide transportation improvement program. Very similarly, the projects that come out of the Fairview PEL will be added to that transportation improvement program. And then those projects then will be ranked based on their benefits, based on a variety of factors that are built into that process. So it's very possible that something in Fairview could be done before these projects. I would also add that, I understand that there's some, there's a feeling of distrust from past stuff, and honestly, what we're trying to do is to dispel some of that, because I honestly am coming to you and telling you, look, we're trying to do it the right way this time. And I know that's a hard message to always agree, and there's no one right way, and not everybody's going to agree on the right path forward here. But I will tell you that DOT is approaching this project with the intent of addressing these issues in the way that we've discussed. These issues are going to be documented in the PEL study. The environmental documents are going to be based on this PEL study. If we get down the road and these things are not included in the document, then they'll have to go back and redo those environmental documents. They'll have to redo that public outreach. They won't be able to just move forward and eliminate those things without those environmental documents having to be redone, which means the public process has to be redone. That's the benefit of doing this process the way we now is. We're going to solidify what we've heard. We're going to solidify these issues into the PEL study. This stuff moves forward and forms the basis for the environmental document. If that changes, we got to go back out to the public and say we're pulling this out for these reasons.
Right, but that's when you get a bunch of people who have had their properties purchased and then a bunch of deterioration that starts to occur because, and I will give credit to DOT that they have worked hard to be upfront in this conversation. But what's left behind is properties that are lying fallow, camps showing up on them, deterioration because we had to go back and then back and then back and we never get there. So I definitely have my concerns. My neighbors have told me support this project so we can get to the downtown. But I think that's a compromise to my peers. And just, we should be very wary because we heard just yesterday from someone that once it gets to a certain point, it doesn't matter what you think, we're gonna do what we're gonna do. And so that's the threat.
I'll also say that the federal process, which this project's being done in the federal process, and I don't know the process by which those properties you're talking about were acquired, but in the federal process, we gotta get to an approved environmental document, and then that's when we can start the right-of-way acquisition process, and that's specifically to prevent those situations where you acquire property and nothing gets built. And because if DOT does that, they're supposed to have to pay the feds back for acquisition of those properties. If we choose not to move forward with the project, we either got to sell the property or pay the feds back. John, would you add to that?
Yeah. If I understand the comment, if the assembly supports this project based on those conditions, but it doesn't support the project without those conditions, I don't know why you wouldn't include that in your approval document. Maybe that's not what you're saying.
Well, it is. However, I think there was someone who sagely, who has a little bit more experience than I said, that those papers are worth a little bit more than the paper they're printed on, but maybe not very much more.
And I don't have knowledge of the project that you guys were talking about or the presentation that you had earlier this week, but I said at the beginning, and I was sincere, I guess, that we're all citizens of Anchorage, we all residents of Anchorage, we all pay taxes in Anchorage, we're all invested in the community. In my mind, we can't build this project without a partnership with the city of Anchorage. The whole DOT versus city isn't a productive relationship in my mind, and we need a partnership to build this because it affects city growth, it affects the system, it affects, so we have to be consistent with land use plans. We just have to because we're in the heart of the city.
And I'll be quiet after this, just note that we had this talk yesterday, it was just flipped. And everyone who was here heard that conversation and put that in context of what was said today. It's like, which one is the real date at the table?
Maybe I'm optimistic, I guess.
Right, no, me too. And just the last note, the 2040 numbers for growth are based on the 2020 numbers that we didn't achieve. And so we extended forward those numbers. And so who knows if we'll even get there then. Just be cautious with the use of those numbers.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson.
Yeah. First of all, some compliments. Just delighted with the work that DOT has been doing on Glen and Parks Highway. It's not only very functional, very well thought out, but aesthetically pleasing. It's a delight. I share Mr. Constance's concern every time I drive up the Government Hill and see the houses that were seized and destroyed in the historic. I need to get into an acronyms to be able to express my feelings about that. And from one of the elders of the tribe, you just can't get out there and predict what the future's going to be, and particularly government funding. It's not contract law, and legislative bodies have power of appropriation, and it's very, very frustrating. I think that what you're planning on doing here with the divided highway so you can dig down between them is a genius idea. And I appreciate it. Something that's been lost here is some of Mr. Dunbar's constituents. We're going to wipe out two great panhandling places there along the Seward Highway. Yeah. Anyways, appreciate the process that you guys are going through. So, yeah. Anyways, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you. And we talked a little bit about Vision Zero at our AMATS meeting yesterday. And unfortunately, it seemed like we might have been slipping back the wrong direction there because we've had a few more fatalities lately than we had previous years. And so this seems like to me would be a program that would reduce the amount of fatalities. And so therefore I would think that we'd be able to qualify to get a significant amount of federal funding for this. And is that the plan? And how much do you think, in the ballpark figure, what percentage of this we might be able to get funding from the feds?
We're following the federal process so that we can get our normal formula for federal funds, which is 90-10.
Right. And I thought that was the case. I just wanted to get that on the record.
We've got some state funding that we have in the bank today from some old appropriations that will get us probably most of the way through design.
Okay.
Federal funding.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
Thanks. A couple things. One, again, that project we're talking about is the Scooter Avenue to Academy, the state's part, and then they dumped the project on us that we thought would be 8, 10, then 14, now up to 25 million to bring real no benefit to transportation, just to mitigate a huge problem the DOT is causing. And I think it's easy to show that piece of that larger project is not necessary now, but it's in the EIS. We got to do it. Period. That's it. So it's just there. Tough luck. So if you do one EIS for this whole thing, and we're 8, 9, 10 years down the road, we go something better. We found something better. Can't do it. It's in the EIS. We don't want to back up, redo the whole EIS. So I would hope you would do as many EISs for this thing as you can, so that if you get to each piece and you go, wow, we got a better. This diverging diamond thing is new, okay, but they can't change their plan. Well, they can change it for that because it works for them, but they can't change a plan for us.
That's our plan, is the individual environmental documents for
Okay, I thought you were saying you were going to go for one. Okay, I vote for as many as you can, so you're not locked in. We're not locked in. And partnership with DOT and the city sounds great. We're partnering on that Scooter Academy thing. It's not a fair partnership. We're doing this, so you got to do this. That's the partnership, and that's the way these partnerships work. And I think we're right to figure that. And then operating costs. It's a big thing. We've got lights being turned off on the highways, plowing being way dropped. The station down there south of our border here getting closed, changing stuff. Days before we hit Hillside, as you would know, and we're going, okay, we're adding so many lanes. This is a huge operational cost increase. Their budget's not going up. Other things are going to not happen for plowing and so on. So at some point, do you look at what change in operating costs this causes and prepare for that? Can you take that money out of other parts of the state instead of Anchorage? That would be, add that to our list. And I'm sorry, one more actually. I forget where this is in the MTP. We had part of it in the short run, part long. Is some of the illustrative? And can I?
Yeah, sure.
Can you remind me enough?
I don't know exactly where all of it is because it's kind of grouped differently than what they have it broken out as. But I think it was mostly long except for the loop and some short.
And long means 10 years from next year.
Short term is the first 10 years of the plan. So.
Yeah, but you have some stuff 3 to 8 years, right?
I forget exactly how much money's in the short term, but my recollection is that it's in about in the $100 million range. And that's about what those first two projects, without the freeway, that's about what those first two projects will cost us in the. So we're also trying to make some consistency. Those will need to be updated once this plan is updated. It's a little bit more than what's currently shown in the short term.
So you have a bunch of the short term lease on.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? All right, seeing none, this work session is over.